This video is brought to you by KEH. Hi friends, welcome out to another episode of Andrew Good Camera. In this episode, I'm so excited because I have two cameras that I love. New loves, I guess. I've newly fallen in love. I've recently fallen in love with two cameras that are in similar tiers, although one is older than the other. We have the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, and we have the Nikon Z6 Mark II. I would say these are very, very similar cameras, and we're gonna dive into these differences in great detail. And we're gonna divide this up into three sections. The first and largest will be, we're just gonna really dissect the differences between these two cameras. And then we're gonna show you example photos between the two, so you can kind of see maybe image quality, color, get an idea or at least a sense of what you might get with these in a photographic sense. And then finally, I'm going to share with you what I would choose based on what type of photographer slash videographer I am, which of these that I would shoot with, which one that I would buy to help you come to be able to formulate a buying decision for yourself. So that's how we'll proceed. Like I said, these are similarly tiered cameras, so there's going to be, I feel like, more similarities than differences, honestly. And some of those similarities and strengths that they both have sensor shift technology, though we will come back to that. Nikon has one extra megapixel of a 25 versus 24 here. Both of them have really great touch screens. Both of them have headphone and mic ports. Both of them have Bluetooth. Both of them are robust and tough and have good weather sealing. And both, I feel like, are ergonomically pleasing to use. Canon and Nikon have both had decades to kind of perfect their interface and their handling, and they're both excellent feeling cameras. That 2-year difference in technology used to mean more in the early days of mirrorless cameras. These days, I don't feel like it means as much because of incremental improvements and how little technology can improve year by year. Don't feel like Canon has really made all that massive of a difference. And so that comes into price. That comes into play with price, where the Canon is $600 more than the Nikon, which is kind of hard to stomach that price difference. Even though it's 2 years older, is it really worth $600 more, the Canon over the Nikon? I'm not sure it is, but we will come back to that. As far as handling, like I said, they both handle really well. Weight-wise, Nikon is a little weightier, it's a little beefier, but not by a whole lot. I don't think you would actually notice it. You would with these two lenses on, of course you will. This 50 millimeter is a lot heavier than this one. But without that, there really isn't that massive a difference in weight or size. Canon might be a little larger this way, but I mean, other than that, they're really, really similar. As far as feeling, they do feel similar, but the Nikon, and this is something that I've always noticed about Nikon, the rubber that they use, it does feel really good quality, and it's a lot more grippy. The Canon, you feel a lot more of that magnesium alloy rather than a grippy rubber feel. And I think, on the other hand, there's a more substantial grip with the Canon. So as far as buttons, layouts are similar. Buttons are in different places. I'm not sure it matters that much. There's plenty of customization ability, plenty of buttons to do whatever type of customization you want with both cameras. And buttons are largely where you need them. And you know, with both of them, you have similar types of layout. Like you have zoom, you have the quick menu. They both have this quick menu where you can access your quick functions. They both have a selector switch for video and photo, which is really nice for hybrid shooters like me. A record button on top. There's so many similarities between these, but Canon does have a couple things that I prefer, just as far as buttons, placement, and just the usability physically. I'm not talking about the menu system, but as far as the buttons. And that is that there is, while there's a dial on the front and the top on both cameras, there's also a dial that Canon's kind of always had, rather than what Nikon has, which is a D-pad, a direction pad, instead of a cycling button. What that means is, with Canon, you can have dedicated dials for ISO, shutter, and aperture. And actually, you get an extra one. With Canon's lenses, they also have a dial that has customization. Like you can set this to various things. So you actually have 4 ways to manipulate your exposure triangle. Whereas with Nikon, you only have the 2 dials. So that means that you're going to be using the ISO button, which to me is a turnoff. I like having dedicated dials for each of the exposure triangle settings. So that's just me. Some people might feel differently. On the other hand, one thing that I really love about Nikon's interface is this top menu that you can glance down, especially if you're waist shooting or if you've got it on a tripod and you need to glance down. That LED is really nice. It doesn't use much battery, so that's not a drawback, and it's just really nice to have. They kind of offset each other when it comes to those differences. When it comes to the screens, Nikon's is larger. It's not a lot larger, but you can notice it. It's slightly larger, more dots. What do we have? We've got 2 million dots on Nikon, where you've got 1,600,000 on Canons, so not quite as much resolution. That's a 30% higher resolution on Nikon. Though for me, it's sort of, I don't know if I noticed that per se. Maybe that's not a buying decision. But when it comes to the way that it articulates, to me, this is potentially a drawback depending on how you shoot. Nikon's is an articulating screen. It articulates this way, whereas Canon's, obviously, it articulates this direction. So this is going to be a lot more handy. Obviously, if you're a video shooter, you can put this in any direction. If you're filming yourself, this is nice to have. I know a lot of photographers hate that. So if you're more of a traditional photographer, traditional landscape photographer, you might prefer this. When it comes to the actual UI, the interface, the electronic interface of both cameras and the menu system, I mean, they're pretty similar. I would say it's a draw here because, I mean, you've got the menu that goes vertically on the Nikon, whereas Canon's, it goes horizontally across the top. They both have really good touch screens. And the language, one thing that's kind of bugged me about Sony and Canon is the language of the interface menu options is not as clear. I feel like Nikon's make a little bit more sense to me, but it's kind of a draw. The Canon does have 8 stops of image stabilization, or at least that's what it claims, over Nikon's 5 stops of image stabilization. This is something we can test, so I did run a test of this to kind of see. I don't have the steadiest hands in the world. Handheld is difficult for me, so I shot both of these at 50 and then went down from there to see how many stops of stabilization I could get out of each of these to see if it makes a difference. There are some confounding variables, like the Nikon is heavier, so that might make it more stable anyway because of that heavier lens that we've got. But so it's not as scientific as it could be, but anecdotally kind of interesting, I guess. With the Z6 II, things were pretty sharp handheld down to about a 13th a second, and then they started to break down after that. With the CANON R6 II, things were good until about an 1/8 a second. So yeah, it's probably safe to say you'll get a few more stops out of the CANON R6 II sensor stabilization over the Nikon. As far as continuous shooting, they're similar. We've got 12 frames per second on Canon, 14 per second on Nikon. But one thing that you'll see on paper that looks like maybe it's cool is that Canon claims that they can go to 40 frames per second with the electronic shutter. I wouldn't read too much into that though, because the times where you'd actually use that are pretty rare. When you're doing continuous shooting, usually it's moving subjects, and I would never shoot with an electronic shutter with a moving subject because you'll get rolling shutter. Your photos will look wonky and weird. And so I'm not sure that's really all that beneficial. And so I would say it's actually a draw because I just can't think of a time where you would use that. Maybe you guys can. Correct me in the comments if you can think of a time where you'd want 40 frames per second electronic shutter, but I really can't think of a time. The Canon does have a higher maximum ISO of 102,400 ISO, where the Nikon will go up to 51,200 ISO only. Now, again, I wouldn't read too much into that. On paper, that sounds really impressive for the Canon, but I don't usually almost ever go over 32,000 ISO myself, and I can't think of it really a time where you'd want to even go up to 102,400 ISO on a Canon. So again, I'm not sure that that's really that beneficial. And even more than that, you can always shoot at the maximum ISO on either if you're shooting raw and bring it up in Lightroom, and you're going to have similar noise levels anyway. So don't read too much into that. Again, I'd call that a draw. There are more autofocus points with Canon, like substantially more. We're talking about 4,800 or 4,900-ish autofocus points as opposed to only 273 autofocus points with Nikon. It doesn't bother me that much because with the type of photography I'm doing. When it comes to storage, with Canon we get just 2 regular UHS-2 card slots, obviously. But with the Nikon we do have that, what is it called? I always forget what it's called. That CF Express port, type B, which, I don't know. I'm not actually a big fan of spending the money on these anyway. I'd rather just 2 regular cards. Not sure that's a huge benefit, but maybe it is for some of you. But what is a very big difference, especially as a video shooter, and it's a bummer for the Nikon, is that it will not shoot, or I guess it will shoot at 4K 60p, but at a crop, at an APS-C size crop. Whereas with Canon, you can get your full frame 4K 60p. So for me, that's a pretty substantial win for Canon over the Nikon. Canon also has a pre-shoot buffer that you can turn on, and this is great for wildlife, for action, sports, where you can capture buffer images before you press the shutter, which is that's not great for battery life. But it is great if you're in the moment and you're doing action photography, wildlife photography. Like I said, Nikon does not have that technology. Also, Canon has vehicle tracking, which Nikon does not have. So the last thing, and again, probably not that big of a deal, is you do get a slightly slower slow motion with Canon. So 180 frames per second as opposed to 120 maximum with Nikon. But that's it. I mean, there might be other subtle differences that I missed, but those are the big ones, big to medium ones, I guess. And yeah, so I don't know, there's plenty of differences, plenty to love about both. They're both great cameras. Before we dive into the photo examples though, and my own recommendations to you, I want to tell you about this video sponsor, KEH.com. So it's not hard for me to tell you why I love KEH, because I legitimately love them. As a sponsor, yes, they do sponsor this channel, but I can't think of a sponsor that I am more excited to talk about, because we've gained so much value out of KEH. When we switched to Canon and I got this Canon device, the first place we went was to KEH to get lenses, because it's so expensive to get into a new camera system. So while we couldn't get the EOS Mark II, R6 Mark II from KEH at the time because it was brand new, we did get our lenses from them and saved a buttload of money. And so I'm really grateful for KEH for that. Also, I was able to sell all my old Fuji gear that I wasn't going to keep and get a lot of great value out of them still. And so KEH is great. They make the whole process so smooth. I was able to just create a list of all the lenses I was sending them, and I think I sent at least 20 lenses and then some other things, accessories and things, when I got rid of the final, I guess, load of Fuji stuff. I just made that list, and then I requested a shipping label from them, and it cost me nothing to send it to them. And 2 weeks later, we got an estimate for how much money we would get out of it, and it was great. It was easy, and it made switching systems so simple. So if you're in the market for new stuff at a discount, or if you're selling old stuff, KEH is the place that I go, and the place that I recommend you go as well. So now we're going to compare some photos taken with the 50mm 1.8 lenses from each system, so you can get a bit of a feel for how things might render. In each case, I'll share how I'm processing the raw files using the internal styles offered by the two cameras respectively, so you can get a feel for their color philosophy. Keep in mind that it's impossible to divorce the lenses from the cameras, so we also are comparing lenses here. Not much we can do about that. But probably the best way for you to compare output is if you download these raw files and look at them yourself in your own raw editor. To do that, use the link in the description, pay me a few bucks and get access to those. Or if you want to join my Patreon, I'll give you all my raw files free now and forever, and you'll also get early access to my videos, and you'll also get them ad and interruption free, so that's exciting. Okay, so final recommendations. If I were looking at these from a photographer standpoint, purely photography, I would choose Nikon personally. And I guess that's if I'm a landscape, portrait, dad photographer, documentary, street. For all of those reasons, this appeals to me more. I feel like it feels better in the hand, it handles better. I like the articulating screen for purely photography. I appreciate the top LCD. I feel like in general it feels maybe just a little bit higher quality and it's more enjoyable to shoot with. So lots of reasons that I prefer it. The only thing I don't like about it from a photographer standpoint is a lack of a dedicated ISO button that Canon does have. But I shoot in aperture priority most of the time anyway, so that's not that big of a deal. But I really like it. But if you're a video or hybrid shooter, then I would go the other way. And that's why I have to stick with Canon, even though my heart is with the Nikon. Being a professional videographer and photographer, I do both. I have to be able to do both on the same device. At least right now, I can't afford to just have dedicated photography and dedicated videography devices. But as for me, I've got to shoot Canon because I need that fully articulating screen for video. And a lot of the video features, most importantly, substantially, the 4K 60p that I get with Canon. So simply put, the other time I would choose Canon over Nikon is if I was a wildlife, sports, race car, whatever. You're gonna get a better autofocus out of Canon and you're going to get more features that might appeal to someone who needs that sort of those sorts of shots, but not by a whole lot, honestly. You probably could go either way, but I think that's it. So yeah, comments, questions, things that I missed, things that I got wrong, feel free to yell at me in the comments. But like always, I hope that you can find ways to do good with your cameras. And yeah, I'll talk to you again real soon.